Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Küstenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, Australia's growing. It's growing fast, isn't it? And while we're used to thinking about our population huddling around the edge of this vast continent, new data from the demographics group that Simon is co-founder of shows the blowtorch of growth is now concentrated in only a handful of places. And that's raising some big questions about the futures of our towns, our cities and the services. Now, over the past decade, we've added 3.7 million extra people in the last decade. That growth hasn't been evenly spread though. Some areas are booming while others are slowly hollowing out. So Simon, I'd like to have a bit of a chat about that, explore these demographic challenges, but also the opportunities, because this is going to be valuable for property investors, but also for business owners and institutions, organisations, because it's important to know where people want to live, how they're going to be living. That's going to shape our futures.
It's absolutely quintessential for quite a few businesses because businesses sell stuff and services to people. And they definitely want to know where those people are. And obviously, the property sector wants to always be on the, ahead of the game, knowing where growth will occur, because property needs a bit of time to be up and running.
Well, in the past decade, we've added 3.7 million people, as I said, but the way we're living is changing. We used to, at the beginning of the previous century, in the 1900s, live off the sheep's back, off the farm. But we've spoken before about how mechanisation is changing farming, how ageing populations are changing our needs, how coastal lifestyle regions are booming like never before. Now our population is nearing 28 million people, and it's growing heavily, but it's really concentrated in only a couple of places, isn't it, Simon? And in the other hand, the interior towns, they're now losing population.
Totally. And the developments are predictable. So first and foremost, we know that generally speaking, population growth continues because we still add more babies each year than people die. And that's natural increase. And of course, we are a migration nation. We still take in migrants. So overall, we grow. But the growth that we take in, we pretty much just throw into the major cities. 80% of our population growth over the last decade occurred in the 5 biggest cities, which is insane. We have 2/3 of our population living in the 5 biggest cities. So we're even more concentrating our population than we've done in the past, which in turn means, of course, that the smallest regional centers are the ones who are missing out of population for various reasons. The most obvious one being that we have farm aggregations, meaning the old farmer can't sell the farm anymore. Can't hand the farm over to the kids and has to sell the farm. Then the neighbor buys the farm doubles in size. You run it even more efficiently because you finally buy the big equipment, so you get more productivity, more yields out of the farm, but you do it with fewer workers. And those regional towns are more than anything functional towns. They are there because a certain number of jobs are needed. They're there to support the surrounding farming or mining communities. And if there are fewer farming workers needed to look after that amount of land, the town shrinks as well, which is quite dramatic. We sometimes underestimate how dramatic this is. If a town falls below a certain population threshold, we lose services. These services could be medical in nature, where the specialist closes down, then the GP closes down. It could be more service related, where a small town at some point can't sustain a local IGA. And so you don't have that anymore. It can be social in nature, where you don't have enough young men to staff to man the footy team. That's quite severe. Those challenges, devastating for regional communities. So the regional towns, they say, yes, I hear all about the population growth, but why aren't they coming to me? And it has to do with jobs, because people, unless they are retirees, need a job. And the regional towns don't offer that many jobs.
Clearly, the big capital cities are where the big jobs are, but the fact that so much of our population is going there is one of the reasons that they're so expensive. Living in a coastal city in the best part of the world and in large accommodation has seen property values skyrocket, hasn't it?
Totally, and that's the thing is if you think about, we just say a decade and we add almost 4 million people. We did not add new cities. We threw those people onto the existing cities, and so obviously those cities become more expensive. That is just the market at play. We did not have a real, honest national decentralization strategy where we create new cities, which it always sounds weird. It's like, we are established. Why should we have new cities? Oh, because we still have plenty of open land. We could easily use a small settlement and grow it by 10x in some instances. It's thinkable at the very least, but we have not been seeing this. So what we're seeing is the smallest of small settlements that service an agricultural region, they're declining. You would then look to the next bigger type of city, these regional centers, and they quite often, sometimes you call this the island effect, but I think of this as the sponge city effect, because these cities, like a sponge, they soak up the population that is either too old to live in a very remote farm because they have health conditions, so they move to the next biggest city where some services are, or they soak up the now obsolete farming workforce because you have more mechanized farms. And so that then leads to very, very quickly aging regional cities because the population growth is not driven by young families. Rather, it is driven by retirees and people that seek healthcare.
Do you think we'll ever see a demographic revival of Australia's rural heartland, or is this population loss just a permanent fixture now?
Well, we'd see a population growth once we throw jobs in there. And sometimes some of those regional areas will tell you we have staffing shortages. We can't find enough workers to actually make the most out of our orchards or so forth. And then for these particular areas, the goal is to make sure that you create dirt cheap housing, because the jobs on country aren't that well paying. And so in order to make your life worthwhile on relatively little income, you need to give those people cheap housing. If you pull this off, congratulations, you will get more population in your town. These things can be turned around, but it is much harder to do this than to just yap on about this on a podcast.
Definitely. Well, it's happened overseas though. So I've been lucky enough to travel to America many times, and there, even in the big state of California, you have a number of big cities, but you also have large inland cities. I mean, one large inland megacity in America, Phoenix, is a good example. But we've done no major infrastructure inland projects like the Hoover Dam in America or other things that have brought people to the middle of Australia.
Exactly. You need an excuse to live inland, so to speak. And so these would be jobs. And we mentioned in last week's podcast that a large scale shift in manufacturing, for example, would be something that could be taking place in a cheap inland city, because land is cheaper. So you have plenty of land to build a massive, let's say, manufactured prefab housing type setup. Give land away for free, essentially, as a state. You say, this is our new city. This is the prefab housing capital of the world now. We bet all on this particular card. We train people. There's a local TAFE. There's a local university looking at the high-tech elements there. And that creates enough hustle and bustle to have a local population settling there and to have an ecosystem grow around this. A city like Phoenix is, of course, born around air conditioning. This was air conditioned manufacturing there, and of course you wouldn't want to live in Phoenix without air conditioning because it's very, very hot. It's the same in Australia. We can just, if energy was cheaper, if land was pretty much given away for free, and if we were to move those manufacturing jobs there with public subsidies or underwritten by the government and supported by super funds, we could pull this off. Not heaps of cities of them, but we could easily get a handful of cities, one in each state, for example. We could make it happen.
Simon, Australia's population is ageing. We've spoken about that before. And one of the ways we're overcoming that is importing younger, skilled migrants, workers, people who are tax-paying age. But I'd assume that, again, the majority of those are going to the cities, and our ageing population is going to be greater in some of these regional towns.
Fully correct. So the age profile in the regions, just as we have heaps of people that are old, almost no workers in their 20s and 30s. That's the time when you leave the small regional town, and you only come back when you have your own kids, school-age kids, and you want to replicate your own wonderful regional upbringing for your kids. And that's where the opportunity would be, is to take in those skilled aged care workers from overseas, and you settle them in those towns. So what this means, though, is that we need to change the way we operate visas. So you somehow need to hand out visas that are geolocated, where you say, yes, we take you in because you are a registered nurse, but you do need to work for a registered nurse, you're an aged care worker, whatever we need in this particular institution. But you do only get your working rights for this particular region. It doesn't need to be just Horsham. It could be regional Victoria or something like this. But you want to more closely geolocate visas, at least for a couple of years, a decade or whatever, to give people a fair chance to settle locally, to give them a very transparent path into citizenship. That's something that they would be interested in. So I think we could pull these things off. And we do need to utilize migration in a much, much more targeted fashion. At the moment, this is very much lackadaisical, the way we allow people into the country and how we check who's in the country. And this could massively benefit the regions if we had an overarching population strategy behind this that says we want this type of development, that acknowledges that for all 100 elderly people, we need X many aged care workers in a region. But we don't have those things as official targets. So at the moment, we just kind of hope that it sort of will work out. And spoiler alert, it won't. So we
No,
do
no.
need more of a supporting hand there to make sure that the aged care workforce comes into the country. We can import them. There are enough people that are keen to work in Australia, to particularly they're after remittances. They want money to send back home. We have this on offer. Why wouldn't we utilize this to take care of our aging population?
Of course, that's not just in regional Australia, but also in the big capital
Yeah,
cities. I
absolutely.
think it's important that we have vital and viable country towns to deliver the services necessary for our farming communities. Now, sure, farming has changed. As you said, it's no longer family enterprises. They're big, they're upscaling, but agriculture is critical for our own food needs, but also as an export industry, it's a major factor. Is anybody, the governments, any authority looking at how to vitalise these towns and keep them going?
Yes, there are. So we do have the Regional Australia Institute. There are, of course, all of these local government areas that are regional that themselves look at this. There are regional local government conferences, left, right, and center. These are all trying to crack that nut. And none of them by themselves is strong enough to pull it off. So this is why I always call for this national demographic strategy, where we say, where do we want to be in 50 years? And this is an honest question. In 50 years, we'll be adding heaps of people. And so you go, well, where should we put those people? And as long as we don't have this strategy, not much is going to happen. As much as just we throw more people into the same cramped cities and we have no coherent plan. And that's a thing that needs to be avoided. And let's see if we can pull it off. I'm doing my bit to yap on about this wherever I can.
Well, interesting. I know you spend a lot of time speaking in regional Australia. So if companies, organisations, government authorities are interested in hearing what you and the research your team have done at the demographics group, how it can help them, I'll leave a link in the show notes so they can get in contact with you, because I know you've got a lot of insights into the future. So we've spoken a bit about the decreasing populations in regional Australia, but we also should look at the other side, the hotspots for growth, the city of Sydney, Gold Coast, and in Victoria, the city of Wyndham, which is Werribee. Your research has found to be the fastest growing areas, but have they planned for the growth for schools, for housing, for hospitals, for amenities? How are they coping?
Yeah, that's difficult because the areas that are growing, these are the local government areas. And the local government areas, of course, Sydney grows because this is the most well-known part of Australia. So people flock into this. This is an iconic destination to live. They are now, it's all built up, so they constantly build skyscrapers to put people there, so they still have room to grow. So city of Sydney grows because of that. Also it grows because this is where the jobs are. So all the young people, they go to the big job center to make careers for themselves. That's the story of Sydney. The story of Gold Coast is that it's threefold. The Gold Coast, first and foremost, is an overflow destination from Brisbane. you can't fit into Brisbane, you move to the Gold Coast, you're closer to the water, and you commute to Brisbane. It is increasingly a CBD in its own right, so it has jobs to offer, so people move close to the Gold Coast. And of course, Gold Coast remains a popular retirement destination for people from all over the country. So you have those three things pushing people into the Gold Coast. Similar narrative is the case for Geelong, for example, in Victoria. And Wyndham, which is on the outskirts of town in western Melbourne, that is growing like crazy because there was nothing there. It was just open land, valuable farmland that you can bulldoze, and you build cheap and quick housing on there. Greenfield development is the fastest and cheapest way of adding housing to Australia. Melbourne wants to grow at 100,000 people per year. And so you go, oh, we need housing fast. And so Melbourne builds out. They bulldoze land on the outskirts of town. They put people there. They then draw lots and lots of nice roads and rails on planning documents, and they hope that they eventuate. And spoiler alert, they don't eventuate magically. Melbourne or Victoria has a gigantic infrastructure backlog. And so we're putting people on the outskirts of town in the very elusive promise that we will give them a train station and all this wonderful infrastructure very soon. And this only gets delivered if it gets delivered with a massive delay. And in the meantime, people are pretty peeved.
Definitely. But there are also some positive emerging trends from your report. Some regional areas like the Eyre Peninsula, regional Western Australia are seeing a turnaround. You've got island effect towns like Horsham, Orroroo, I don't even know where that is, in Oregon in your report, are still growing at the expense of surrounding areas.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the growth, so if you are a regional area and we talk about growth, quite often it is the lack of outflow that creates growth. So what do you do if you grow up in a regional town the day you hit 18? It's like you move out. Or you live the day you leave school. You move out, and then you move to a neutral town. You live in this neutral town for a little bit. You partner up there with somebody who is not from your regional area, and then if the town is lucky, you return in your 40s with the kids in tow. But you probably don't. So these small towns have this constant outflow of young workers, and sometimes a town can turn this around. And usually this is linked to something like people engaging more into distant education. Sometimes it's a local TAFE, a TAFE that opens up a local arm that can operate there. Sometimes it is that the local smelter or quarry, whatever the main employer is, adds more jobs, doubles in size. And you then give young people relatively decent jobs straight away. And they stay. Not all young people will stay because it's still part of the life's journey, of your own hero's journey, if you will, to go and explore. But if you tell people a compelling story why they can return and how they have an affordable life, how they will have an easier housing journey on the Eyre Peninsula than they would have in Adelaide or in Melbourne, yeah, absolutely. Tell them this story, and it does work to quite a large degree.
See if it does work. But at the moment, there's, I guess, two sides of things. There's the blowtorch growing significant population in the large capital cities, and on the other hand, a decreasing regional population. Is this going to create a two-speed economy within Australia and two classes of people?
Yeah, most certainly it creates two classes of people that have no idea what the life of the other people look like. When I'm out in the country, out in small communities talking to people, they say, I could never live in the big smoke. This is way too hectic, it's so annoying. You don't know anyone. You don't greet your neighbors. This is weird. It is not in their blood. They couldn't imagine it. And then you go to the big city and you go like, I don't know how they do it. It's nice to visit for a weekend, but what would I do out there? I would go insane. And so we create this not just from a geographical perspective, but more and more social elements also create this, where Australia is split apart and the two halves can't even fathom why you would live such a life as the other half. And that's not good for social cohesion. That makes it very difficult to feel like one people, one country. So that's a bit of a worry of mine.
Well, looking ahead, you're a planner, you help people plan their futures. If we were successful and we got back together in 10 years' time in 2035 in this podcast, what would Australia look like if it successfully managed these demographic changes?
Well, I think we would have started a discussion in 10 years' time where we realized that yes, population growth in Australia is real and we need to proactively manage it. And so at this point, we would have realized that in about 70 years, we will double the country. And we would have prepared for this. We would have come up with a strategy that acknowledges where we want to see this growth. I think to a relatively limited degree, this would encourage inland settlement. We would have a manufacturing strategy that would push a bit of inland development near timber, for example, if we want a housing construction near some sort of cheap source of energy for some housing manufacturing process. But overall, Australians are lifestyle-obsessed people that want to hug the coastline. So the growth wants to occur somewhere between, let's say, the Sunshine Coast and Melbourne. This is mostly where people want to live. So that means that if we add most of our 28 million new Australians in the next 70 years along this eastern seaboard, we must start thinking about a fast rail network there. At the
You
moment, it's
need good transport, don't you?
you do need mass transport to move people quickly around. What we're doing at the moment is remember that quite often, if you see the rankings of most traveled air routes around the world, Melbourne, Sydney is almost always in the top three.
Yes.
That's because there are two cities of 5 million people that have a lot of exchange that is needed between them. I'm not saying do this exchange with a train line. That's silly. But I'm saying if we had a fast rail network around the eastern seaboard, you would have more settlements that could interact better with other settlements. It's easier to work on a train than to work on a plane. So speed isn't as important. It's the quality of the journey, how you can use it. That would change the speed of travel for lots and lots of these social travelers. Increasingly, the older travelers would probably prefer a train ride, even if it's a bit longer than a flight. But what we would need to have done in 10 years' time, because even then the train corridor wouldn't be economically viable, probably. But we would have earmarked the corridor. We would have understood that we need to at least bookmark the corridor, if you will, and then don't build over it, because that then just makes the future development even more expensive, even less economically viable.
Yes. Well, I think today's discussion, Simon, really highlights how important it is to understand the why behind Australia's population trends, not just the where with the location. It's clear that some parts of our countries are booming with new residents, others are quietly losing their critical mass, and that's going to make it hard for them to thrive. But if we don't start planning better now, the consequences are going to ripple through everything from healthcare to housing to education. And I feel sorry for those people living in those towns that are slowly dying away. But Australia's geography has always shaped our destiny. And as you pointed out, Simon, the decisions we make today about migration, about service delivery, about workforce planning, they're going to shape the Australia we leave to future generations. So for those of you watching or listening, if you found this conversation valuable, please share it with somebody else who you think needs to hear it. If you haven't so far done so, don't forget to subscribe on whichever channel you're listening to this so you don't miss our upcoming weekly episodes where we continue to unpack the trends shaping our futures. Simon, look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Fantastic. I'll catch you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.